Welcome, everyone, to our podcast series from skillfully.co.za, which is the marketplace for world-class courses for professionals in financial services and related fields. And today we are privileged to speak to John French, who leads the team at Communication Guru, a training company that empowers and transforms delegates through self-confidence and excellent communication skills. And many of you will have heard of John. He's nurtured some of the top performers in a range of professions and industries, and he's also improved the bottom line of many organizations. And Skillfully, if you go to our webpage, you'll be delighted to see a course that John has designed. It's called the Face-to-Face and Virtual Presentation Masterclass. John, welcome today. Great to see you.
Greg, thank you so much, and a big hello to everybody.
John, I'd like to begin our discussion with a question about first impressions. Seems good to start with first impressions. And my question is, well, there's really two things. Firstly, you've mentioned before in discussion that a presenter really should make a strong first impression. It's essential. Why is that? And secondly, could you share with us a little advice on doing so?
Well, Greg, we've both made a first impression here. I mean, the research shows that first impression is made within 1/10 of a second.
Wow.
And that means that it has to be visual. So people will take one look at you or one look at me today, and they will have formed a picture, or they'll sense how we fit into certain stereotypes, because we all work according to patterns. And I think that's something that we try and teach at Communication Guru, is we create what we call, or what I call, the conscious communicator who is aware of these dynamics. And you can sort of show up well and put your best foot forward, because that's what a first impression is all about. It sets the tone for the whole engagement, the whole presentation, the whole interaction. And if you're not conscious of that, you stumble into these things and you project all the wrong messaging. And we've got to ask ourselves,
1/10 of a second.
1/10 of a second, people and the research back in 2011 was looking at things like trust, likability, and competence. And trust, psychological safety, is judged the quickest. Do we feel psychologically safe with the person or the environment? And that decision is made in 1/10 of a second, which means it's very visual.
So how can we boost people's impressions in that first 1/10? Is there anything sort of relatively simple to do?
Before we even open our mouths, they take a look at us. I mean, virtually like this, it's everything from the person, what they look like, how they're carrying themselves, what they're wearing. It's to what's behind us. You and I have got very different virtual backgrounds, or very different backgrounds sending out very different messages.
Yes.
And that's all part of our individual brands and our professional brands. And we've got to make conscious choices here, because people are noticing these things all the time.
And what's one of the things you've done? I'm sure you've done tons of things. What's one of the things you've done to have that great first impression 1/10 of a second?
I think we first of all need to realize, why do we need to create a first impression in the first place? Because ultimately we're trying to influence our stakeholders. That's the only reason we meet with them, engage with them, present to them, is we want something from them. And if you want something, you need to show up well. You need to make a great first impression. And because that first impression is what we call non-verbal or very visual, your visual impact is really important. From the way you're dressed, to what's around you virtually, to the briefcase you have, to your what you're projecting with body language and your own personal energy and attitude. Those are things that we help people become far more aware of, and we teach them how to project the right signals.
That's great. Let me say, my background for you is very plain now. There'll be some skillfully branding, which is added in production. But I'm feeling like it's valuable, from what you're showing us, to have kind of a more varied background.
I think, Greg, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. I mean, this is a conversation. It's an intimate conversation and podcast. So, I often use for corporate work my own branded virtual backgrounds, but I thought that might be a little bit too contrived and artificial. And, for an intimate chat like this, I thought let's have a natural background. Obviously, my office over here doubles as a recording studio. The lighting is right. The background was built there for a reason. It's static. It works. So, I quite happily chop and change depending on what I'm trying to achieve with the interaction.
Yes, I like that, John. So you're thinking about the purpose of the meeting, and that works for me. I can see the books, I can see these lovely kind of mementos, I can see the painting, and it is a warm, intimate impression.
And Greg, if you think about it, when we started, we're setting up for this podcast, the first thing you commented on was the artwork.
Yeah.
So it was an attention-getting device, and it helped to break the ice.
Yeah, I like that. For those of you who can't see it, the artwork consists of a series of dancing putti, little cherubs, and even from a distance and remotely, they look pretty delightful. And John has promised to give us a dancing putti dance at the end of this interview, so do watch out for that.
No, I didn't. You tried to influence me, and I've got my boundaries, which is also really important.
Anyway, John, we first began speaking several years ago, and as you know, and we know it skillfully, these past couple of years have really been a wild ride for presenters and have required radical adaptation. So if looking now at 2023 at the world of a presenter, what skills do you think are needed to be a top-notch, versatile presenter right now?
Well, Greg, let's just look at our journey together. When you and Jimmy and I first met, it was a live engagement, a live meeting. So, live presentation skills, live communication skills were all we needed 3-4 years ago.
Yes.
Suddenly, fast forward to today, is we're sitting in very different places, and we are both now broadcasters. And broadcasting skills are totally different from the old sort of communication skills or presentation skills. So we're now working very much in a hybrid work model environment. And the new soft skills currency is broadcasting skills. For the rest of our careers, is every single one of us is going to be a broadcaster for the middle of the road type of engagements. And you're going to have to learn about how to set up your own recording studio, how to get the lighting right, camera angles, how to work with the camera, how to build relationships over the camera, how to engage and hold attention virtually, how to influence virtually. So, you know what? We need two skill sets here. You need live communication and presentation skills, but we cannot ignore what has happened, and that so much of our communication is now virtual. And it's these virtual communication skills, which are so foreign and new and scary for so many people. That's the new soft skills currency.
Yes, so it's this hybrid set of skills. And let me follow up with a question for people who feel a bit daunted by a professional setup, who aren't presenters professionally, but need to present sometimes at work, like many professionals do. They're working online, they're working from home, they don't have a kind of bespoke recording studio. Are there any simple technical tips they could bear in mind for presenting more professionally?
Yes, there are. And before we even go there, I think the consciousness that we need to create up front is in financial service or asset management, is these companies, your company spends a fortune on fancy boardrooms and great receptions and flowers and all that, because that all creates brand collateral. It gives the brand status.
Yes.
And you as an individual have a responsibility as a brand ambassador to hold that status and that brand up high. And working remotely, suddenly your kitchen sink behind you is now the brand, or the bed headboard, or the messy shelves, or the open bedroom cupboards. That all gets associated with the brand, and that becomes major brand sabotage. The whole marketing spend goes right down the tubes. So we need to take responsibility for not just ourselves and our personal brands, but the brands that we represent. And we want to portray them well, both live and virtually. And virtually it becomes more complicated because most people are working from homes.
Yes.
The majority of people don't have a fancy home office or recording studio and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's first of all, I'm a big fan of corporate virtual backgrounds because it gives you confidence. Because if you've got your company's name and logo behind you, suddenly you can be placed. It's not just you speaking from your bedroom or your kitchen or your dining room table. You've got a brand and brand collateral and brand status behind you. It also shields your privacy. It shields your home. It shields your intimate space. But the big thing there is you've got to have the lighting or get your lighting right in order for virtual backgrounds to work. Because we've all seen blobbing shoulders and moving hair, and that's incredibly distracting. It really undermines your professionalism and credibility. So quick trick here is you've got to get the lighting right. In order for virtual backgrounds to work, you've got to have lighting coming at you from the front. The moment, like in offices, like there's lighting from above, distortions, lighting from the side, distortions, lighting from behind you, shadows and distortions. So if you're sitting at a boardroom table, try and face the window, face outwards. Don't sit underneath a light above you. And these are tricks you learn or we teach anyway, but get the lighting right. It's the first principle of camera work. Is lighting. You've got to understand how lighting works.
From the front, not from above, not from the sides, not from behind.
Look into the light and shine your own light.
Gosh, you could have been a minister, John. I feel quite.
Keep that in mind. I keep it in mind.
I like that. Thank you. Thank you. That's a helpful tip. I think I will use it next time. My light is coming. Not quite from the front, not quite from the side.
You've got a window to your right, yeah. You've got light source from your right. I can see it, yeah.
Excellent. Now, I guess there's a constant. There's some constants, whether it's virtual presenting or the traditional kind, and one of those is anxiety. And one of the things that really caught my eye when we were discussing the contents of your course is that you said you wanted to talk about anxiety, not just in dealing with it, ways to deal with it, but also why people feel anxious. That's very intriguing. I always just take it as natural. Of course, a lot of people get nerves before presenting, but why do people get anxious before they present? And, what are one or two things that we could do about that?
Greg, I think to answer that question, I'm going to take a step backwards initially and say that, in order for you to influence, and that's what we're trying to do when we present, is people have got to trust you. They've got to buy into you. If you don't trust yourself, if you look nervous, if you look anxious, you sabotage yourself, your message, and your ability to influence. And let's face it, life is not fair. It's always the most important, critical situations and engagements. There's always the most perceived pressure in place, and people get really nervous.
Yes.
Now, what drives those nerves? Primarily, the biggest thing is personality type, because presenting is very much an extroverted activity. Extroverts love being on a stage. They love the attention. Bring it on. And most people in financial services or asset management are completely on the other side of the spectrum. And most people are what we call the analytical personality type. And analytical people who are great in the industry and for what they have to deliver are introverted and logical. Introverted and logical people hate the spotlight. They hate the limelight. They tend to hate presenting. And that's why you'll find in virtual meetings in the asset management or financial service worlds, people just don't turn cameras on. They're too scared to turn their cameras on. They don't enjoy turning their cameras on. And virtual etiquette is not yet in place in most organizations because it's so new. And that is a disaster, because if we cannot see each other, we have no impact. We've lost over 50% of our impact. If we cannot see each other, it's incredibly difficult to build a relationship with each other or to trust each other. It's impossible for me to influence you if you can't see me. And also, if I can't see my audience, research shows me that they're not exactly present. They're doing a million other things. They're involved in other work. They're on social media. They're eating.
Yes.
47% of them have gone to the bathroom. They're not even listening to you. That's not ideal for business. It really isn't.
No. I like this idea that if you're not trusting yourself, if you're feeling the anxiety, people pick that up, and the feeling is, well, if he or she doesn't trust themselves, why should I do so?
Well, Greg, I'm going to be cheeky here. I mean,
Yes.
Coronation. What is Coronation's strapline?
What is Coronation strapline? Remind me, John.
Trust is earned.
Trust is earned. Yes.
Trust is earned. So you've got to earn the trust of your stakeholders. You've got to earn the trust of your audiences. And if you don't trust yourself, how on earth can they possibly trust you? It's not going to happen.
Yes, I like that. So it's a lesson beyond presentation. You've got to have all your ducks in a row when you go out and deal with clients or colleagues. But self-trust must be warranted and there.
Ideally, Greg, but that, as you know, that doesn't happen. Even the top people in the industry get nervous, and nerves are normal. But what is so important is to learn, and this is exactly what we teach in our foundational modules, is we teach people how to self-manage, how to control their initial nerves and anxieties so it doesn't get projected, how to think on your feet, how to control your brain, how to control your emotions, your body language, and your voice. And if you learn how to do that, suddenly you become functional again in these critical situations. You learn to mask your nerves and you achieve far greater buy-in. And isn't that what we're trying to achieve here?
Yeah, no, well, those all sound very valuable things. And let me ask you this. I mean, in a previous chat with you that I've had with you, you once described yourself delightfully as an extreme extrovert. And I felt very jealous because I think I fall more along that introverted and logical line of things. So, everybody's complicated. But for people who are more introverted, who may have more challenges in presenting, what are some, one isn't going to presumably change one's personality type, and one doesn't really want to. So what are one or two ways to deal with this fear, specific ways to deal with this fear of presenting, being out there in the limelight?
Well, Greg, I always say you are the best you. You can only be the second best somebody else. And in terms of likability and trust, if you're not being authentic, number one, you're not going to trust yourself because that's not who you really are. It's a fraud. You're a fake. But also, you're not playing to your strengths. So what we at Communication Guru do is we do a lot of personality profiling to help people to understand their own natural, authentic communication style or presentation style. And they all have strengths. Introverts have incredible strengths of their own in terms of presenting. And that builds confidence, it builds trust, it builds likability. And you've got to project with your own strengths in your own way. And I would imagine just reading you're pretty analytical as well. And analytical people, confidence is based on knowing and understanding. So once you learn about self-management and voice and body language and how to present and how to structure your messaging and how to make an impact and how to influence, that knowledge and that information is going to make you way more confident because you're going to know how to do it. And that's how you build confidence in analytical people. It's about the knowing and understanding.
Yes, it's not sort of emulating the mystery essence of some very extroverted person. It's knowing that here are things I ought to do. Let me prepare this beforehand. I've got my checklist or whatever else I'm using. Okay, I'm done. I'm kind of armored and ready.
Absolutely. And what we're dealing with here are your soft skills. And ironically, the soft skills are the hardest skills to master.
Yeah.
And it is our job as trainers to take all this airy-fairy, intangible soft skill stuff and to distill it into logical language that analytical people can understand, to reduce it to logic, formula, models. We need to speak your love language because that's how we access and influence you.
That's great. And are there other, I mean, I understand now that my love language is, pretty analytical. I can see how things could work. Are there other people's love languages, ways into a kind of confident, skilled presentation? Sorry, I don't mean to ask a question in the sense of who else is there but people like me, John, but that is in effect what I'm asking.
There's 75% of the world is quite radically different to you. And, there are so many personality profiling tools and models, but, in my experience and my research and my knowledge, you can cut through all that noise and reduce it down to 4 basic types, which have been acknowledged throughout human history, right from the original pagan days.
Oh, yeah.
And the analytical personality type is one of 4. Personalities work on 2 axes between logic and emotion, and introverted and extroverted. And you get your 4 quadrants, 4 different personality types. In my mind, keep it simple, understand the core, understand the basics. I think a lot of the personality models are way too and unnecessarily complicated. I like to keep things strong, basic, and speak truth. Yeah.
Yes, I like that. And I suppose we're thinking about not just ourselves as presenters, but also about our audience. My understanding is that in your communication career training, it's not only a kind of self-control and understanding, but also careful thinking about your stakeholders out there. You want to influence them, you have a message for them. Who are they and what will they respond to? So maybe you can tell me a bit about that. You speak of reading the audience to recognize and influence different types of stakeholders. Can you say a little bit about how that would work?
Well, absolutely, Greg. And I often start workshops and programs by saying the greatest thing you can learn about communication or presenting is it's not about you.
Right.
It certainly isn't, because we don't need to build a relationships with ourselves. We don't need to influence ourselves. It's always about who's on the other side of the table or who's on the other side of the screen. And that's why it's not about selling your philosophy or your process or your company or whatever. It's basically showing how you can add value to them on the other side of the table, or how you can address a pain point or deliver a solution. If you make it about them, suddenly they become emotionally and mentally invested in the story, in the presentation. And it's way easier to get them to buy in when you make it about them and you show how you can help them, or you use their love language, because then you're actually speaking to them at a very deep subconscious level, and that is where decision making is made.
That's great. And to do that, are you asking them questions, kind of eliciting information? Are you literally kind of looking at them and seeing how they're responding to various approaches? How do you know who you're dealing with?
Well, I'm John French. I'm not John Edwards, so I like to be tried and tested. So with the delegates on a program, they will actually do a very simple personality assessment. So we do that. We teach them exactly
right at the start,
during the program, the programs.
Yeah.
But then we teach you how to recognize the different personality types, and we're only talking about the 4 different styles. And by the very way that people show up and how they communicate and the questions they ask, pretty simple to read once you've had the blinkers taken off. And I always say it's like becoming psychic, because once you understand this simple model, is suddenly there are no surprises. You understand why you're married to a specific person. You understand why your children fight with each other the whole time. You understand exactly what to expect from people, because behavior is driven by type, by personality type. And it honestly, it's the one thing that has helped me to understand how life works.
I mean, it sounds like the benefits of this knowledge flow beyond doing a professional and effective presentation. It can actually extend to your relationships more generally.
Well, absolutely, Greg. I mean, it's, as I said, it's not about us, it's about them. So as a parent, you need to be a great parent to that child and that child's personality type. If you want a good marriage, you need to actually understand who you're married to. what their love language is, what makes them love and shine you, and what triggers them more than anything else. So, you know, the application of this is hugely powerful, both personally and professionally. You'll understand conflict, you'll navigate conflict so much more effectively and minimize it. So the application is completely widespread.
That's great. That is very helpful. And yeah, I like this notion that it's not about us, but about understanding our audience well. And yet there is something, you know, there are some things to take care of for ourselves. And of course, we have to have a professional manner of presentation, and also what you refer to as a personal professional brand, or this nice phrase of yours, a signature presence. So can you tell me about that? You know, suppose, you know, somebody comes to you and says, John, maybe I'm not a professional presenter, but I present a lot at work as a financial services professional. And, you know, I've heard of this notion of a signature presence. Is this something I should have? And if so, how do I build it? How do I know what my presence should be like?
All right, you know, it's not a choice. Every single one of us has a brand, has a signature presence. And not only that, we have two, believe it or not. We've got real live brands and signature presences, and we also have a virtual or a digital brand. I mean, we're communicating virtually and digitally all the time as well. And we need to be conscious of this and take responsibility for this, and also to curate this. So
Yes.
we need to learn about how branding works, what our strengths are, who we are, what our personal patterns and personalities are, because that is where we start building brand from. And you know, your brand is not a choice; it's a perception, and it's a projection. So however we choose, or however we come across, and however we communicate, that is perceived and interpreted as our brand. But the more conscious we are and the more empowered we are with these communication skills, we can shape perceptions. We can shape how we come across, and we can make the impact we want to make.
Do you ever kind of, if you think about people who have very successfully projected a certain signature presence, maybe professionally, does anybody kind of in particular come to mind, or really it's relative to one's purposes? I don't have any kind of models of people doing an excellent job.
Well, you know, everybody's doing a job. Some are better, some are worse. I think, you know, anybody that has achieved success, is communication is usually central to that. And they would, no man or woman is an island. You don't create success by yourself. So I think those that achieve any level of success, is the signature presence and the brand is strong. Some people do it better and more congenially than others, but it's out there. Is we're making an impact on the world around us. We all have a circle of influence. But, you know, we can play the game in different ways. And the more strategically and the more emotionally intelligent you are, is you tend to achieve buy-in and sustainable buy-in. I think that's the key word here, is if you know exactly how the dynamics work and how you can best put yourself forward.
I'm presuming you've encountered situations where somebody feels they're projecting a certain image and they're not managing to do so. They've fallen in some way. Have you found that sometimes?
Absolutely. And you know, what we're talking about here is a blind spot. Is that everybody can recognize it, but except for the poor person involved.
Yes.
And you know, in terms of giving and receiving feedback, which in terms of leadership and the professional world is so important, is blind spot feedback is the most sensitive and difficult feedback to give, because it's an enormous shock for the person, because they, like Florence Foster Jenkins, think that they can sing, and no one can stand the sound of their voice. And you've got to be very sensitive in terms of how you land that information or that feedback when it is a blind spot for the person.
How interesting. And I mean, I presume you, having worked for for many years in this have probably kind of come to thoroughly understand how you come across. That's probably the case for any kind of self-conscious presenter who works for a very long time on these matters. But maybe the things we just don't notice about ourselves. Gosh.
You know, it's communication is completely habit-based, and you know, even if you like, I mean, I've got 27 years experience with training these type of topics, but
yeah,
it didn't all channel into my head at the beginning. Is I learned and I continue to learn all day, every day. And, you know, I think that's the joy of this whole virtual phenomenon is you get to see yourself at the moment. I get to see myself, and the camera, I hate to say, is the greatest teacher, because once you've seen it, you know what other people are being dished out.
Oh, interesting. And John, I wonder if I'm in with a kind of further line, and the line is about change over time. So you've mentioned one kind of change where previously we were accustomed to seeing each other in person, and now it's this hybrid approach. Have you seen any other changes in what is expected and what is effective about the way we present and behave with one another in presentations over the past couple of decades? Like, let's say we're talking face to face, and let's set aside the technology. Does a really effective presenter behave more or less now like they did, you know, in 2000?
No, I think, you know, communication, like everything, does evolve and does change. And I think, you know, the whole pandemic period pivoted it faster than it had for 20, 30 years.
Okay.
If we sort of look back to like the 1980s and 90s, Cold War, and what was happening socially and politically and economically, the whole concept of power speaking and power dressing, it was all about power and confidence and hard selling and all those things that not exactly sit very well with us today.
Right.
And, you know, with the rise of the internet, you know, the average consumer person is way better informed because we can do our research. But by the time I contact you, I've looked at your website, I've understood your products, I've checked your price points with other price points in the market. I'm 70% through the sales cycle before I even meet you. So soft selling and your sort of communication and soft skills have become way more important these days, as well as, you know, it's all about virtual at this point in time. So it's all continuing to evolve. But I think the good news is that communication has relaxed. If it's taken to the extreme, it's unprofessional. That's also brand sabotage.
Yes.
But we want to find the balance in the middle ground between showing up looking professional, but being relaxed and accessible. We need to have those live skills, those digital and virtual skills. We need to be able to surf the 21st century.
That's great, John. And I think, you know, what has been clear to me throughout our acquaintance is that you keep an eye to that changing sweet spot. You are, you know, communication gurus in a very dynamic field, and you watch the changes and move with them to maintain the effectiveness of presentation for your clients.
Well, you know, it's pretty easy for me, Greg, because, you know, my clients are speaking to me about their pain points. What's coming up? What are their staff battling with? What's new? Where do they not feel competitive at this point in time? So I'm seeing these trends and this evolution happening all the time. I obviously research from my side as well. And yeah, I like to test my own thoughts and opinions against what's happening out there in the market and what's happening globally. And I'm always relieved when I'm sort of on par, if maybe not slightly ahead of the others. Yeah.
That's great, John. Thank you so much. Been a pleasure to speak to you, communication expert, and also shades of preacher, marriage counselor, and many other areas of expertise. John French. Thanks, John. Great to have you.
Thank you so much, Greg.